According to PwC's 27th annual Global CEO Survey, sustainability needs are top of mind for Sub-Saharan Africa's CEOs. This in the face of climate change and regulatory uncertainty. Lullu Krugel, sustainability leader for PwC Africa, joins us with more insights around this. Lullu, always a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Nonatando. Nice to be with you.
Wonderful. I want to maybe start off by looking at the overall report here and what it tells us about the various threats and even concerns for CEOs in Sub-Saharan Africa, maybe even looking at some of the mitigating strategies that might already be top of mind for some.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we did pick up, interestingly, also aligning with what came out of the WEF's report in Davos, is the threat of misinformation, disinformation, technology and security around technology not going our way, etc. And then the other big theme that's also influencing decision making around sustainability as well is the perceptions about where the economy will go and volatility in the economy. And interestingly enough, but not surprising, we find that companies are in a position where they need to make choices about where they focus. And then sometimes, this shorter term cost pressures and the challenges that they are facing now may result in them delaying some of the strategic decisions that they need to make longer term down the line. And also it's more difficult to convince shareholders to invest money on things where you might not immediately see a return or where the return might take a little bit longer. So those are some of the key themes. But interestingly enough, what really surprised me and impressed me is that if you look at the initiatives that leadership in companies are undertaking in Sub-Saharan Africa to address the sustainability challenges that we do have, it's right up there on par with what is happening in the rest of the world. So we're not lagging behind. And we are definitely, in terms of our thinking, right up there with what the rest of the world is thinking and doing.
But I want to also zoom in here on issues around climate, because, of course, this is a big one. And I know on the African continent, I mean, if you just think of what the El Nino effect just has done to the agricultural sector over the last 12 to 18 months here, climate change is really a reality for us. It's here. How are CEOs taking stock of this, Lullu? Where is it faring on their list of concerns? And even some of the strategies also that they are being implemented to respond adequately.
Yeah, climate change is a strange one for us as a continent because, if you look at the history of what has happened, we've not been the biggest contributors to climate change, but we are being hit by the impact of that quite severely. And again, interestingly, something that came out of the World Economic Forum's report is that they do not list climate change as a risk anymore because they say, we're living with it. We're living with the consequences of climate change. So the big thing is just how it's playing out. And for most of the CEOs that we surveyed, this is either moderately high or extremely high on their agenda of things that they worry about. From two main areas, how do we adapt to climate change? And how do we mitigate some of the negative consequences that could hit us? And it does look different depending where you are. I was just reading another report yesterday that looks around specific areas of risk globally. And if you look at the ability to adapt and to mitigate climate risks, there's two aspects to it. On the one hand, there's the severity of the impact, but on the other hand, there's your ability to react to that. And unfortunately, we are being disproportionately hit by some of the negative consequences, as you mentioned, droughts and flooding. And as somebody in the agricultural sector explained to me the other day, those 1 in 100-year events are now happening twice every 10 years. So it's definitely having a severe impact on things like food security, on supply chains, on forced migration of people, where they need to move to other parts of the continent to actually, keep themselves afloat. From a business perspective, we are seeing companies actually have a pretty good grasp on some of the physical risks that might transpire and the impact that that has on the assets. And that again, African companies in particular, and including South African, of course, are using technologies that are to their disposal to say, do we understand that the risk that climate change might pose to our assets, to our suppliers, and to the value chain?
Also, another one that came up here, it surprised me a little, but maybe you could give us a little bit more context. The risk of regulation, and the concern around regulatory issues there. Where is that? Where does that come from? How is it emerging at this point?
Again, also that was one of the areas where, company leaders were saying to us, this is very high on our agenda. And we're very concerned about how that would impact our business. And for me, when you start engaging with business leadership, yes, of course, regulation in itself, the compliance and so on, a factor and does impact on their ability to do business going forward. But the other thing that's probably more pertinent, again, looking at where Europe is going, the US is going with some of their climate and sustainability regulation, is what will end up happening in our countries, what will end up happening in the markets. And we've seen different paces of regulation, some countries like Kenya and Nigeria adopting some of the climate regulation much quicker than the rest. So that uncertainty, disparity, and then also where we trade with markets such as Europe and so on, there's a significant impact in terms of our businesses. How do we adhere to it? What will be the cost, etc.?
With that said, of course, then in an uncertain environment and with so many moving parts, Lulu, scenario planning emerges here, as something that needs to be front and center of how corporates move and how CEOs think. Just talk to us about that, just the kind of thinking that also needs to emerge as scenarios are played out.
Yeah, I think the big thing with scenario planning is people sometimes confuse it with forecasting. And we sometimes think that we need to be exactly right. And that's not the purpose. The purpose of scenario planning is thinking through what could potentially happen. What is current signs and trends that's telling us that there's certain things that might happen? Some of them are emerging, some of them are much clearer. And for us to, as businesses, have a response ready, if something like that plays out, we thought about it already. We thought about a potential strategy and how we can respond to it. Having a scenario doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be 100% certain that it's going to play out. That's not what it is about. It's about thinking, what do I see currently? What's it telling me about the future? And where do I as a business, or we as a business, want to be in the future? How do we respond to that? So that's a very important solution that companies have at the moment, or approach in a future that's incredibly uncertain. Or the term that I heard recently was BANI, brittle, anxious, non-linear, and now I can't remember the I. But anyway, we're so used to VUCA, but that's even starting to change. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like something I should also be adopting in my private life, I'll be honest. Thank you, Lulu. Thank you so much for taking us through this report there. That was PwC Africa's sustainability leader, Lullu Krugel.